Um, I mean, if we really look at the problem of Pashtunistan, let's start. I mean, like if we need to look into the history, we need to decide what's our reference point. From where do we start? Do we start from?
So let's say in 1947, when Pakistan becomes independent.
Yeah. So I mean, if we say Pakistan became independent by that time, so let's just roll back a few years. Allow me to do that.
Yes,
When
please.
it was clear to the British Indian politicians, to British India, and also in Afghanistan, that the British are going to leave India and they just gonna go from there. That's the time when the Afghan government starts to write to the British that, well, you have some territory of us, and we need to talk about that. And they've written multiple times to the British Viceroy that they need to discuss the issue of the Durand Line, which the British always refused and did not entertain any request by the Afghans. So when the Afghan government realized that their requests sort of are not being paid attention to, so then they kind of resorted to say it in public, to say it in using newspapers, on the radio, and talk about it loudly. And that's the time when it starts to the Pashtunistan issue comes into. So I mean, by that time there was no exact proposal that there would be a Pashtunistan. The Pashtunistan proposal came into existence after Pakistan is created. So it was not there. I mean, when I say Pakistan is created, it's not right. I would say that when there was this confirmation that, yes, India is going to be divided between Pakistan and India, right?
Of course.
And there have been referendum in various states where the choice was given, because referendum is always a choice between two. It's
of course.
So either it's Pakistan or either it's India. So and nowhere was the case that a third option was there. Afghanistan's demand was that there should be a third option, and that should be an independent Pashtunistan. I think the first time when Bacha Khan went to Kabul, it was during the Khilafat movement. It's in the 1920s.
Yeah.
And it's the time when the Muslims of India, they started this movement that the British were unfairly treating the Ottoman Empire, the Muslim Empire. So the Khilafat Osmania was endangered and they were unfairly treated. And that's when some Muslim clerics, Muslim leaders decided that, well, it's imperative on each Muslim that they move out of India and seek another place of residence where they can actually go and support the Ottomans and or the Turkey for that matter. And that was the time that a really mass movement started. Migration started from British India to Afghanistan, and so many people went into Afghanistan. But I mean, given what we know about Afghanistan, it was never capable of handling such large number of immigrants, which have just decided that let's go in the name of the religion, the name of Islam. We need to go to Afghanistan, a new land, and we just would find our way what we do from there. This was and Bacha Khan was leader of a local organizing committee of this Khilafat movement. So he went to Kabul, and that's the time when he met Amanullah Khan there, and he met Tarzai there, right? And they get to talk. But in his book, Bacha Khan has mentioned that even though Amanullah Khan tried his best to entertain and to provide for all what he could, but the scale was big, and there were so many other opposing elements that he could not do so any long, and many Muslims, many British Indians or Pashtuns have to return. I mean, this also included Punjabis and other Indian Muslims, not just Pashtuns, but so many people then decided to come back into British India across the Durand Line. I've never seen anything where Bacha Khan himself questioned Durand Line.
Okay.
Before the creation of Pakistan, I would say. After Pakistan was like Bacha Khan's brother, Dr. Khan Saab, was in government in the NWFP. So I mean, they were running the government there, and it was British Indian government. So and then there was never a word that they would not recognize the border of the British India at that time. And Bacha Khan spent many years of his life in prison in Pakistan, even though like when he took oath in the Pakistan first Constituent Assembly, he declared that yes, he was a Pakistani and he was there that's what he mentioned. Exactly where he mentioned that he never envisioned Pashtunistan as an independent state, but a state where there would be more autonomy for Pashtuns. But I mean, you know what happened in Pakistan with Bacha Khan. It was very unfortunate. His own brother, I mean, joined this one unit proposal where everything was included in Punjab, kind of, Pakistani politics. And Bacha Khan was still in jail. And
so was one unit a policy where the four or five provinces of Pakistan were incorporated into a single province?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, sure. Was that in response to any sort of ethnic nationalism, or what were the concerns behind that?
Well, I think it was something that it was in response to the Bangladesh, what we know. So kind of creating a bigger electorate, so to say. So it was, I mean, something politics within Pakistan, but Afghanistan was, I've read the state documentation of Afghanistan, and they were really opposed to that proposal that integrating Pashtun land into one unit was not a good idea and it should not be done. But I mean, just look at it. Bacha Khan is in jail, and Bacha Khan's elder brother, Dr. Khan Saab, who had already been in government before the partition of India, he was actually a minister in that setup. But I mean, when Bacha Khan was released, then he goes into exile. He stays in Afghanistan for many years. Then Sardar Dawood. I mean, this is the time Sardar Dawood Khan, even if he's a prime minister, he continues to push pro-Pashtunistanis people, pro-Pashtunistanis politicians, and there are, I mean, he has done a lot to support the cause.
Sure.
What he believed was actually, I mean, like we didn't discuss that. What's exactly the motivation for Afghans behind Pashtunistan?
Yeah, because I mean, even in Afghanistan now, there's an idea that the Durand Line was an entirely colonial line, and that once the British left, it had served its purpose, right? And the fact that when Abdurrahman Khan signed it, he did not envision it to be a permanent severing of what would be his country at the time. So how would, if we were to play devil's advocate, why is that an incorrect idea or a correct idea?
I mean, so many people have asked me these questions, and I always kind of smile or laugh when they ask me that. Well, the Durand Line Agreement it's never actually an actual agreement. It was never there. No one has seen it, and that if it is a reality, it was only for it was for 100 years or for a certain period of time. I mean, it's not.
So wait, so the Durand Line, did Abdurrahman Khan see it as a permanent sort of line to cut Afghanistan?
I mean, his idea was not that he wanted to cut Afghanistan. He was, of course, he was a British supported, a British installed king there. He wanted to assert his own rule, to ensure that his rule is not challenged, and how he was going to do that if he was going to start refusing what the British was saying to him. So it was never an option for him. So it was kind of a dictation for him, but this dictation was, it was also in his favor, because this also ensured his rule and what he wanted to do on the other side of the line. But like British severed lane from Afghanistan, and British allowed Afghanistan to go and then sever some other lands into Afghanistan, like the Nuristan, what we call today, Kafiristan. He was given that, well, you can take the Vahan strip, and that's how it comes there. So I mean,
so they bribed him with other lands, basically.
Of course, I mean, you call it bribe, or you can also look at it, all the borders of Afghanistan, unfortunately, it's something not that the Afghans decided themselves, it's something that it was decided for them.
No, but I mean, if we take that line of reasoning, right, of course, all of the, generally in the Islamic world, the borders that have been drawn overwhelmingly have been drawn by colonialist powers. But for example, the thing we could say that in 1767, Ahmed Khan Abdali signed a agreement with the Emir of Bukhara that signaled the Oxus or the Amu Darya as the boundary between their kingdoms. There have been numerous battles between the Persians and Afghans over Herat, and Herat reverted to Afghan control, right? So, but with the Durand Line, the idea is that this line was not something that has a historical precedent. Whereas, for example, when the Durrani Empire disintegrates and it forms into rival principalities that start wars with each other, they're still part of the same collective whole. And then the British sort of, carved it with a knife. This is the sort of the idea.
I mean, if you want to look at the historicity of the Durand Line, so Durand Line is not something that came into existence in 1893. 1893 was the time when it was officially signed, That's what we know.
Yeah.
We know that before that, during the Sikh rule, when the Sikh occupied the Pashtun land and their rule extended into to till Peshawar and then till Jamrod. So I mean, it's something that started in 1830s, right? So I mean, there is a history of 6-7 decades before and these were like the Afghan influence then stayed till the Khyber Pass. It was not extended beyond that.
Yeah.
What we know is in 1837, when Wazir Akbar Khan came with his army, with his force to challenge the Nalwa Singh and Ranjit Singh's rule, he came only till Jamrod. I mean, he won that battle. And one wonders, if he has won that battle, why didn't he stay there? And that was like the time that he would have, one would imagine that this was the time Afghans could have said, well, fine, we have won a battle, we could stay there, and this is our extended border, and we would try to take over Peshawar. But he then goes back to and kind of retreats from there. So, I mean, there is historicity to before 1893. So.
No, but I mean, wouldn't you say that you have to bear in mind that at this point the Sikh Empire is much more wealthy and stronger than Wazir Akbar Khan's forces, because at this point Afghanistan's disintegrated and Wazir Akbar Khan is not fighting for all of Afghanistan. His father is the Amir in Kabul. Kandahar and Herat.
This is brother by his uncles, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Kandahar and Herat are completely divided, so this is a war that they're entirely fighting. Yeah,
I mean, also this reaffirms the fact that what was the map of Afghanistan back then? So, I mean, was it different principalities? So. Did that included Khyber? Did that included territories which are across the Durand Line into British India? So that leaves that question.
Sure. So, I mean, with regard to we discussed the Durand Line being sort of a formal border, is one of the legacies of Amir Abdurrahman Khan, specifically in the region, because he's, we could say, the first real ruler of Afghanistan, and that he instituted a centralized state, a centralized government. But obviously, the effects of the Durand Line are obviously across it. What are the other, we could say, speculate legacies or effects that we still feel of Abdurrahman Khan in the region?
I think, with what Amir Abdurrahman Khan, I'm not sure if to what extent he's being discussed in Afghanistan, but when I look at his, I've read his book that he commissioned.
The Lie by Sultan Muhammad Khan. Yeah.
Yes. And of course there are 2-3 other books that exactly on his life, and by people who were contemporary. I mean, for example, there was this one surgeon, doctor, who was with him. He written a book on him exactly on that time. So Abdurrahman Khan, what he did was, I've also mentioned on my Twitter that he was just another king. He just wanted his rule not to be challenged. And for that, he was able to sacrifice everything or put in line everything. So we see that he actually went and did a military takeover of Kafiristan, expelled, displaced the locals, and he gave interesting reasons why did he do that. He lists like he has given 6 different reasons why he invaded Kafiristan and renamed it, and also forcefully converted the religion of the people. One of the reasons he mentioned that these people actually landed own land in mainland Afghanistan. They were in ownership of territories, and there was the possibility that the Russians could come and they could take over Kafiristan, and if that would happen, which would ultimately also mean that the Russians could also lay claim on land of Kabul and Ghazni and other areas within Afghanistan. So one of the reasons that he mentioned that he did was this. And there is also, I think, something that troubles, it's also an unfortunate factor or a scene in Afghanistan's politics is as I mentioned, he was a king. He would try to have authority and violence in Afghanistan to his own rule. He did not want anyone to challenge his rule, and for that he would go to any extent. So he went against Hazaras. There was Hazaras rebellions, 3-4 rebellions that they rose into, but he would just go and suppress those rebellions. And of course, he was really brutal in his rule. He was, I remember this one doctor, which I just mentioned. There was one mullah, one priest, and he had some issue on his throat, and he really wanted to be operated because it was growing in size. And for Muslim mullahs, anyone with some physical disability or disfigure you are not, that's what they believe, that you are not, you cannot lead prayers, you cannot remain a mullah. And he would go to this British surgeon that I needed to be operated, I need to have this thing fixed. And the British doctor would tell him that, no, I cannot, there is too much risk involved and you could die. And then one day he told him that, well, if you go to Abdurrahman and if he gives you the permission, or he gives me the indication that I can do that, I would only do it. And he goes to the king, and the king actually gives him permission that, yes, you can go and he can operate it. So the doctor asked Abdurrahman on a later occasion that, well, he can really get killed because our methods are not that good yet, and I for sure can tell you that he would die. And Abdurrahman tells him, well, let him die. If he wants to die, who are you and me to stop him? Let him die. Just have him operated. And the surgeon actually have him operated, and he dies in 2-3 days. That's what happens. So,
wow.
And I mean, there are stories of Abdurrahman putting to death many people by his own sword.
Yeah.
So, and he would just do it. So, I mean, he was really brutal in his ways. I mean, that's how, that's how wars of that or kings of those times were. So you were not like somebody sitting in a control room.
If I may, Dr. Saib, what's interesting about the Afghan nationalist perspective on Abdurrahman Khan is I often talk to many Afghan nationalists, modernists, particularly people who are very modernist and secular. They say that the brutality of Abdurrahman Khan was necessary in order to create the nation state. So the Westphalian nation states that were emerging all around the world, first obviously in Europe, later on in the rest of the world, it was a necessity, and in order to create an Afghan nation state, it was absolutely necessary to crush any opposition to the nation state. So if that means that he had to massacre and kill people and forcefully displace people, then so be it, because thanks to Abdurrahman Khan, we now have a nation state. So how would you respond to that?